I've got many things here.
Here come the attendees.
Yes, we've got about 140 registered for today.
Fantastic.
Okay, great. So, Bridget, we've started the webinar, haven't we?
Yes.
Fantastic. Hi, if you're joining. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for a few more of the registrants to join, and then we'll get going. I think, Bridget, we could probably share the slides now. So, that's great. Hi, everybody. Just in case you're joining right now, we're just waiting for a few more participants to join before we commence. Give people another minute. Today's session is going to be recorded, so we will be sharing that with everybody who has registered. And everyone else can also visit our website for this and all of our past webinars. So I might get going now. Thanks everybody for joining. Welcome to BRC-A's Buying Power Webinar series. Today we're going to be focusing on renewable fuels for corporates. We will be obviously departing from our usual focus on all things renewable electricity. To do this, it's our first webinar on this topic. So if you have any thoughts or comments, just get in touch and share those with us. We'd love to hear them. So today, as always, we're joined by industry experts who will share their insights into renewable fuels. It's going to be quite a general focus today. Some of you will know a lot more about renewable fuels than others, so it's going to be reasonably basic. We have a generous group today of 5 speakers, and it will be more presentation style today than our usual panel style, so that we can understand as much about each of the initiatives as possible. So I'll introduce our speakers in just a minute. Today's session is going to be recorded, as I mentioned before, for the benefit of those who are unable to attend. And you'll be able to find it on our events and training page as part of our knowledge bank on our website. We'll have time for questions at the end of the session, but feel free to pop questions into the Q&A or the chat, and we'll seek to answer those as we go along. Today, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, just the next slide, thanks Bridget, of the lands on which we all meet today, many different lands. And for us here in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I've got a little bit of a sore throat today, so apologies. I might be handing over to a colleague shortly if I need to. So if you're new to the BRC-A, just on the next slide, we are a not-for-profit organisation providing independent training, connection and resources to organisations seeking to purchase renewable energy for their business. We, in addition to training, we provide templates and guides. We've got about 23 guides on our website there. We've also got lists of consultants and market policy. So our goal when we started was to support the market with corporate-supported renewable energy of 5 gigawatts of renewable projects by 2030. We already met that goal last year. So now our goal is to support the federal government's goal of 82% renewables by 2030 with 12 gigawatts of renewable energy projects. And so just a really quick update before we get going. We are in the middle of developing a renewable energy buyers group program for companies who are interested. Please let us know if you would like to join. Our next webinar on that topic is on the 11th of July. So please come along and learn more about that if you haven't already. John Prendergast, who's waving his hand now, can tell you more about that.
Keep it going. So on to the webinar. Could you go on to the next slide, please, Bridget? Many of you joining us today will be looking for ways to reduce your Scope 1 emissions in order to meet decarbonisation goals. Renewable fuels offer a way to do this, whether it is as a bridge until your processes are electrified or as a long-term solution for hard-to-abate activities. Our membership covers many of these industries, from hospitals with boilers to industrial processing to logistical companies and mining companies. Are renewable fuels limited to sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF, for airlines? What are the current options and what's coming up on the horizon? So on to our first speaker to answer those questions and help us understand more is Matt Walden. Matt is a partner with Deloitte's Energy and Climate Advisory team. Matt specialises in providing advice to industry and government on energy transition with a focus on hard-to-abate sectors. Matt has advised extensively on renewable fuels in Australia and internationally. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Jonathan, and I just hope that that Jackie's okay there. But I will quickly cover off, and I've got the envious job of trying to give a bit of context here within a very short period of time. It is a sort of very complex but relevant subject matter area. And I will just firstly start by a quick terminology check here. And there are some different terms that refer broadly to the same concept. So you will see the visual there: low carbon liquid fuels. You've seen the term renewable fuels. You'll also have heard the term biofuels as a few examples. For the sake of simplicity, they're all broadly similar in terms of their objective of looking to displace traditional fossil-based fuels with low carbon or sustainable options. There are nuances to them, but again, for the sake of our conversation today, let's use them all under a broadly same definition. But renewable fuels, what are they? They're sustainably sourced fuels, typically from waste or biomass-based sources. Those feedstocks then get processed through a range of different technology pathways to that end liquid fuel. People would be familiar, for example, Australia does produce ethanol, which is a form of renewable fuel, albeit not necessarily one that is drop-in nature. In that case, it is blended with other fuels to be allowed to use in current practice. There is, though, an importance, though, of moving to what we call advanced biofuels, which is where you do start to get into a fuel that's, in theory, indistinguishable from its traditional counterpart. The most common of which is probably talked about is sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF, as the acronym is pronounced, which is one of the key decarbonisation levers for the aviation sector, as an example. But why are renewable fuels important? At last measure, about half of our total energy demand is from liquid fuels, and it's a key challenge to decarbonise these. There are a number of pathways for common use cases. So, for example, passenger transport vehicles and its electrification is quite well known and under progression. However, there's a need to think more broadly for that as well. Some of those pathways will not necessarily have electrification options. And again, using that example of air travel within our targeted decarbonisation range. So what are the challenges or what are the issues? So at present, they cost in the region of about 3 times to 5 times more expensive than their traditional counterpart. There aren't necessarily established supply chains. Policy to support their production is evolving. The technology is there, although it needs to mature further. And then the broad-based adoption needs to take place following that. So despite those challenges, there is a very positive outlook for this sector. And just based on the fact that we will need these to meet our targets, that's a fact. So we will need this decarbonisation lever to meet those objectives. And I might, Bridget, if you could just switch to the next slide as I conclude some of my remarks. And we also, this is another one that's quite commonly picked up, is we can be an exporter of these renewable fuels. We have such great land mass, such abundance of agricultural areas that can use this as an adjacency. Again, not to take primary use, but as an adjacency. And also the ability to meet both our local target and demand. So you will see, for example, the visual there on the right, and this is an international forecast of the growth in renewable fuels, and you'll see coming from 2024 with a relatively small base. So these fuels are used in a number of jurisdictions, the European Union and the US being probably the most prominent, but then going into broader, bigger use cases. There are very well-known case studies. So, for example, Rio Tinto operates one of its mines purely on renewable fuels in the US, and in the European Union, there is existing SAF mandates that support this fuel production. And the last and probably most important one is the current government policy, whereby recently announced a $1.7 billion initiative, the Future Made in Australia package, which will hopefully support this. And I think Alex Grant, who's on the call, may speak to this in a little bit longer. So Jonathan, I might pause there. I wasn't sure if there's a couple of questions you wanted to present now, or otherwise we can keep progressing.
There is a couple of questions come in. I'm tempted to address one of them just while you're there. So does the Australian government have a policy of sovereign fuel development to make us self-sustaining? I guess if we're going to be able to export these things, it would make us more self-sustaining on our own domestic use. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jonathan. And fuel security is a very big, crucial issue for the Commonwealth Government. Australia at present has a very small number of refining facilities left, and the vast majority of our fuel that we consume, and including the crude oil within those refineries, are all imported. So a movement towards renewable fuels would support our longer term objectives in terms of energy security.
Fantastic. So we'll keep you there, so you can have you on for questions later. But it's a packed panel today, so if that was it, Matt, we can keep moving to the next speaker. Excellent. Cheers. So next is Brad Bailey, a senior project officer for Renewable Gas Certification Scheme, working for Green Power, and that now has a live project at Malabar. Brad Bailey is a senior project officer leading Green Power's National Renewable Fuels Program. Prior to joining Green Power in 2022, he spent 15 years working as a geoscientist in the mining and gas sectors. Brad, my father was a geoscientist in the mining sector, so it's great to hear. Brad has a PhD in geophysics and climate science from the Macquarie University, and is part-time studying a Masters of Sustainable Energy at the University of Queensland. Over to you, Brad.
Thanks, Jonathan. And hello, everyone. So firstly, I've just got a few quick slides to introduce who Green Power is, who we are, what we do, and then I'll provide an overview of our new renewable gas certification, which was just recently launched. So firstly, for those that aren't aware of who Green Power is, we're a national renewable energy accreditation body, which was established in 1997, and we certify renewable energy products that retailers and certificate traders sell to make sure that the customers get the green product that they pay for. The program's aims are to provide energy consumers with that option to choose a green product, and we also aim to support new renewable energy generation by making products more commercially viable and to ultimately decrease emissions from energy use. Now, this has been working successfully over a very long period of time for renewable electricity, and just last year we launched our new renewable gas certification, which is aiming to support the development of the renewable gas industry and to provide an option for commercial and industrial businesses to decarbonise their gas use. Next slide, please, Bridget. Thanks. So the certification, it's a voluntary scheme. It's open for participation to renewable gas projects all across Australia. And through certificate sales, the scheme is providing a way for businesses to match their gas use with low emission renewable gas, whilst also directly supporting the development of the renewable gas sector in Australia. So renewable gas developers, we want to support them get their projects up and running as quickly as possible by providing that mechanism for them to unlock the green premium of their product but we also want to play a role in getting the very limited amount of renewable gas available to the sectors that really need it. So these industries are those that aren't yet able to electrify their processes and need gas as the chemical feedstock. So we're not making the certificates available at this stage to residential customers. They are reserved entirely for businesses. Next slide, please, Bridget. Now, to give you an idea of what a real-life renewable gas project looks like, here is the Gemina-owned Malabar Biomethane project, which is located in that picturesque location there on Sydney Water's Malabar Wastewater Treatment Plant in Sydney Southeast. So this project is the first biomethane project in Australia, which is injected into the grid, and the first renewable gas project that we've accredited under the Green Power certification. So what's happening is that they generate biogas from the wastewater sludge and they capture it. Now they burn some of that for on-site electricity use, and the remainder of it, Gemina runs through a biogas upgrader and it strips out all the contaminants like CO2 and other little nasty gases. And the gas that comes out of that is almost pure methane, and that's equivalent to what's in your natural gas grid. So they're injecting that directly into the grid for use. As far as carbon abatement goes for the project, the life cycle emissions of the biomethane is around 90% lower than fossil natural gas. Now, Gemina is actually creating renewable gas certificates now in our certificate registry for the volume of gas that they're producing and delivering to the grid. And the certificates can then be sold to a business customer who can make sustainability claims that they are matching their fossil gas use with green power accredited renewable gas. Now, we have a long list of projects located all around Australia, just like this, but some much, much bigger that have expressed interest in participating in our certification. So we're expecting more and more renewable gas certificates to become available for businesses to purchase in the near future. So it's a quick 101 on renewable gas and our certification. Back to you, Jonathan.
Sorry, just had to unmute myself. I've got a couple of questions for you. So how does renewable gas work? What are the applications?
Yeah, okay. I think Matt just gave a pretty good brief summary on, I guess, renewable fuels, how they are produced. And with renewable gas, that is one of the renewable fuels. So you've got the liquids and then you've got the gases that make up fuels. So renewable gas it's produced in a variety of ways, and it's typically utilizing those biological biogenic feedstocks, and you use a biological process to break that down in anaerobic digestion facilities. Now, the renewable feedstocks include waste streams, so things like agricultural waste, food and garden waste, animal waste, sewage sludge, as well as landfill gas. And the resulting gas typically has a much lower emissions profile compared to fossil natural gas based on that full life cycle emissions intensity. Producing biogas from biomethane, it also helps manage waste. So it diverts waste from landfill, it reduces emissions, air pollution, etc. There's also a valuable byproduct that comes out of it. It's called digestate, and this can be used as a nutrient-rich fertilizer, organic fertilizer that can be reapplied to the land to improve crop yields. As far as applications go for renewable gas, biomethane can be used just in every way that natural gas can. So whatever comes out of your pipes, you use it for heating, cooking, industrial processes. Biomethane can do the same. Biogas, which is that raw gas, it's primarily methane, but that also has CO2, but it can be used for on-site renewable electricity generation, also for heating, so space heating, water heating, industrial processes. And then you've got renewable hydrogen. So that can also be injected into the grid like biomethane, but up to a certain percentage, so around 10 to 20%, depending on where you are in the world. It can also be used as a direct feedstock into industrial processes, such as metal refining and chemicals production. So you can produce things like ammonia, which is a key ingredient in fertilizers and also explosives. And hydrogen can also be used in fuel cells for transport and to generate electricity. So yeah, hydrogen is really a bit of a Swiss Army knife of sorts when it comes to renewable fuels. Any other questions, Jonathan?
Conscious of time, I can report that Jackie's okay. She just keeps coughing, so she's made it through this morning right up until the introduction of this webinar, but no longer. Oh, there she is. She's rejoined in picture only for now. So I'll keep going, but just had one more question, but conscious of time. But in terms of the voluntary market for renewable gas, when do we expect this to be established, and what would the indicators of success be?
Yep. Okay. So it is probably first it's worthwhile explaining at a high level what is meant by renewable gas or renewable energy voluntary markets. It really refers to a market where energy users are able to choose to purchase renewable energy or renewable energy certificates voluntarily, which is beyond any mandated or government regulations. So this allows the buyers to support renewable energy production or development and contribute to environmental sustainability. As far as how long it's going to take to get established for the gas market, well, it's already through our green power certification, it's already in place, so it's available. But a key factor that's really going to accelerate the uptake of that voluntary market will be the recognition of renewable gas certificates by carbon accounting frameworks such as NGERS, Climate Active Cert, for example, so that businesses can use the certificates to reduce their emissions rather than just saying that they're matching their emissions with these certificates. So this is really critical, and there's been a lot of really positive movement in this space just recently with NGERS signalling that they are working on this in the background to make an update to the 2025 NGERS to look at Scope 1 emissions for renewable gas certificates. So that's a really big step forward for the industry and also for business gas users. Now, the second part of the question, what are the indicators of success? They're really going to come from the number of renewable gas plants built and operating around Australia and the volume of gas that they are producing, which is displacing fossil natural gas. And then coming out of that, the amount of CO2 which is abated by using this low emission renewable gas in Australia.
Fantastic. We better keep moving. Time is of the essence, as always, in these this packed webinar today. Thanks so much for that, Brad. Our next speaker, Alex Grant, comes to us from ARENA. ARENA has been leading the charge in many ways on renewable fuels for some time, including producing a roadmap for renewable fuels in Australia together with Matt Waldron a couple of years ago. Alex Grant is a director at ARENA in the business development and transaction team. ARENA invests in projects to accelerate Australia's shift to an affordable and reliable renewable energy future. Alex holds a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Sydney, CFA charter holder and a chartered accountant. He has experience across financial modelling, investment and commercial analysis. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bit of a grab bag of an intro, so maybe I should update that. But great to talk to you all today. So this is the disco version of what ARENA's been doing in the broader renewable fuel space. So if we just cut to the next slide, please. For those who don't know, ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. So it's an agency of the federal government and the independent board, and we're very much focused on the global shift to net zero emissions. But I guess our neck of the woods is on pre-commercial innovation and accelerating that. And ARENA's been around for over 10 years now. If we cut to the next slide, it's a bit of a portfolio view that ARENA's deployed or committed $2.6 billion across a host of technologies, a host of technology readiness levels, and for a whole bunch of use cases. So if we jump to the next slide, please. I guess I just wanted to touch on, there have been a bunch of roadmaps, pathways, and otherwise plans developed by people who've been thinking about this for a long while. And I guess the role that renewable fuels can play cuts across many use cases and many feedstocks and pathways. So I've listed a few up there. As Jonathan mentioned, ARENA commissioned Deloitte and NEA to do the bioenergy roadmap back in 2020. And that was really focused on leveraging the highest and best use cases for biomass in the country. And it listed a whole bunch of use cases, but focused on sustainable aviation fuel and biomethane for pipeline injection as the two that were most promising, but also reference renewable diesel and process heat as being of interest. The second batch there, work from the ETI, and really good information if you haven't come across this already, on how to decarbonize industry, and some really good work there. And the third piece there, Cyro's report from last year, that really, I guess, kicked off a bunch of momentum about sustainable aviation fuel and how that's a pretty clear near-term focus to decarbonize aviation. The last piece here is just to call out that the Department of Infrastructure and Transport are currently seeking views from industry on the transport sector for their net zero plan. I'd encourage anyone who has a view or can talk to their experience to please make a submission. I think they're open for another couple of weeks. And I guess maybe to cut across all of these roadmaps, renewable fuels will play a part in what's commonly referred to the hard-to-abate sectors. So heavy vehicles in the road transport and off-road space, aviation, maritime. It's probably fairer to say that these aren't hard to abate, but hard to electrify. And so some of the work that's been done in recent years really starts to prove the case of where renewable fuels make sense technically and commercially. So if we jump to the next slide, please. This has a list of ARENA programs, and the first observation is, it can be opaque for the market to figure out what's available and when. And so these are, I guess, just showing that we've been open for a little while. So programs like the Advancing Renewables program has been around for quite a few years now and linked to our investment plan. Whereas some of the newer programs like the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund, as Matt Walden mentioned, announced in last month's budget, which is exciting. It just takes a little bit of time to work through the mechanics of that. So that's sort of coming in short order. And the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Fund was a $30 million envelope focused very much on development. That's closed, and hopefully there'll be more to say in coming months on how that's progressing. But if we jump to the next slide, please, Bridget, I'd like to just talk through the two open programs that are very much targeted on industrial decarbonisation and the role that renewable fuels can play. And that's the Industrial Transformation Stream and the National Industrial Transformation Program. So these have similar aims, but slightly different funnels of how to get through. But the first, the ITS stream, it's a $400 million envelope, of which there's currently $150 million available for two focus areas, process heat and off-road transport. And that's where renewable fuels can play a role in both of those options. That it has a slightly tighter eligibility regime because it's targeted at existing ENGA reporting facilities in a regional area, whereas NIT, smaller envelope, but a broader eligibility criteria. And if anyone on the call has programs or projects that they think might be interesting, encourage you to reach out through the website. We've got an inbound email there, and would love to hear more about the types of projects that you're looking to undertake to unlock your Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And it can cover sort of early stage feasibility and feed work right through to pilots and deployments. So that's me, Jonathan. Back to you for any burning questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I've got heaps of questions coming in. Certainly put them in the Q&A section. So if they go in the, I'm not even sure if chat's enabled on this webinar, but if they end up in the chat, we often miss them. So in the Q&A, thanks for getting those questions in. So Alex, who can apply for the funding and how?
Great question. It's a broad spectrum of who can apply. The regional, for instance, under ITS, the project needs to be to the benefit of a regional existing ENGA facility, but we've had approaches by sort of advisors, developers, as well as the entities themselves. So if you are working with an entity, more than welcome to apply.
Fantastic. And I see some types of projects there in that slide. But what types of projects do you expect or hope to see?
Yeah, so process heat's been an interesting one because you've got a variety of sectors who have different temperature needs and different levels of readiness, and they've tended to do their own reviews or have sought the advice of consultants and have, in the same sector, have come up with different answers. So I think we're seeing that some have gone down an electrification pathway, either with TES or some batteries. Some just, it's clear that they've got sort of a bioenergy pathway for using either on-site or local biomass. And then others have sought to do some kind of energy efficiency. So there's a range of projects there. I think what I'd like to call out is it's not technology specific, but if there's a role to play for renewable fuels and that end case really does need it and can show that it makes sense, we'd love to hear a bit more about that opportunity.
Thanks so much. Up next, we'll go to the next speaker. We have Rupert Maloney, also from the federal government, from the CEFC. Importantly for our project developers joining the sessions today, Rupert will provide us with an investor's perspective on renewable fuels projects. Rupert is Executive Director, Alternative Fuels at the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. Rupert leads the CEFC work in investing in the commercialisation of alternative fuels, including hydrogen, bioenergy, waste and recycling, as part of the transition to net zero emissions. Rupert has been instrumental in developing opportunities in the emerging hydrogen sector in Australia. He has around 20 years experience across investment, finance, corporate development and legal roles. Over to you, Rupert.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Can you just jump to the next slide, please? I'll just do a very, very quick overview of the CEFC for those of you who are unaware of who we are. So we're essentially the federal government's or the Commonwealth government's green bank. So we have access to more than $30 billion and we're investing on behalf of the federal government across the
Rupert, your audio is coming through a bit muffled. Anything you can...
Sorry.
That's all right.
Better?
That's better.
Sorry about that. So we're investing across the clean energy transition, aligned with the federal government's targets. Maybe if we jump to the next page, please. So just quickly, our investment priorities. So we're investing, as I said, across the economy. We're focused on greener energy and delivering net zero. That's very much where alternative fuels is, and my focus, and certainly renewable fuels is a key area of that. But then also across the broader energy system. We're looking at transforming energy and resources. So that's around energy efficiency, using low carbon materials, and then also across better use of land to close the emissions gap. So that's around natural capital and carbon sequestration. Next slide, please.
Rupert, it seems the longer you talk each time, it starts off clear and then becomes muffled as you go.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I'll try and see if this works. But this is what I wanted to talk about today, really.
Loud and clear now. It's great.
Is an investor's perspective on investing in renewable fuels projects. We're probably a bit more focused on the larger end, but so maybe some of these comments are around larger scale renewable fuels production facilities, and some of the barriers that really do need to be addressed from an investment perspective as we look at projects and we work with project developers to work through some of these key risks and uncertainties. And so that's irrespective of whether you're an equity or a debt investor. We need to address some of these. So maybe I'll jump through these 4 categories. One is around technology risk, and there's a range of technology readiness across some of the technology pathways for renewable fuels, and some are more mature than others. But working through those and understanding how that risk will play out both through construction phase and the operation phase. So the next one's really construction risks. That's really around delays and cost blowout for the construction phase. When you set up a renewable fuels plant and you put some debt and equity into it, you're really investing around cost to complete and time to complete. So that's a key risk of a project, and that does need to be managed through the financing structure and the due diligence phase before the financing. Another one is feedstock risk. So this is around understanding what feedstocks are used in that plant and how that feedstock is sourced And so the availability or the volume of that feedstock and the price of that feedstock as well. And that's a key challenge for any renewable fuels plant, is understanding where it's sourced from. Will it be available at the volume assumed, and at what price? Because that has a direct implication of output as well, and overall cash flow of the project. And the fourth is revenue certainty. So who's the plant selling product to, and at what price? And how firm and certain is that pricing regime? Because one of the challenges is that you've got an element of uncorrelation, or it's not correlated between feedstock and output. So if we think about a renewable diesel plant, for example, or a sustainable aviation fuel plant, they're selling a product which is pegged to ultimately oil price, global oil price, and you'll be seeking a green premium over that price. But the correlation is not correlated always to feedstock price. So that's a challenge for these projects that needs to be managed. So these risks can, to a degree, be managed through the financing structure. But there's the consultation that both Matt and Alex referred to that is underway at federal government level, the low carbon liquid fuel consultation, which is out in the market. That is about really, when you have a look at the documentation, about contemplating both supply and demand side policy levers to catalyse this industry. And that's really about addressing some of these risks. The revenue certainty, that could be addressed from a demand side policy mechanism. The construction technology risk could be addressed by supply side policy mechanisms as well. So these will, and that's what government is out there consulting on at the moment, to address whether industry, or get industry views on some of the policies that may be needed to really prepare some of these larger scale projects. I might wrap up there, but that's an investor's perspective, or that's how we look at sort of when we invest in these projects, really understanding these risks and how they can be addressed through the financing structure itself, or through the commercial arrangements, or through policy as well, which will enable some of these projects. So I might wrap up there and say about the audio still playing out.
Thanks so much, Rupert. Many of BRC-A's members are project developers, historically solar, wind, large-scale wind and battery storage projects, but many have an eye on hydrogen and other similar projects. So it's great to hear from that perspective as CFC. I do have some questions for you, but I might hold off a moment and go to Simon next and come back for those questions. And just with the audio came through a bit muffled at times. So we'll just go to Simon next, but Rupert, please stay online for the Q&A at the end, and we'll give you some questions there if that's all right. Yes, and now to actually hear from a developer. So Simon Curry is the co-founder of Energy Estate, an integrated zero carbon independent energy producer, an IEP, focused on accelerating decarbonisation, driving innovation, and delivering with respect and impact. Simon and his team are passionate advocates for increasing local content and ensuring that renewable energy projects deliver enduring outcomes for local communities and traditional owners. So great to have Simon on the call today, a long-standing relationship with BRC-A on corporate PPAs, and glad to hear from him on renewable fuels. Over to you, Simon.
Hi, hi everyone. If you thought
Oh, your internet's a bit patchy, we think, Simon.
it was bad, I'm not sure.
Simon is on the Eyre Peninsula today, he tells me, so we might be having a few issues reaching him at this moment. So that's all right. Simon, you've just frozen there, so that's okay. Perhaps before COVID takes over again for me, what we might do until Simon is able to re-establish contact, I might hand back to you there, JP. We might look at some of those questions in the Q&A. There's a really good list of them. Some of them have been answered and some haven't so far. So back to you, JP.
Absolutely. So in terms of, I have a question for Matt here. In terms of renewable fuels, are they only for aviation? And what are the types of other industries and applications that are now seeking renewable fuel solutions?
So Jonathan, really good question. And sustainable aviation fuel is probably the one that's most prominent for a number of reasons, including the need for that technology to support targets. But what is probably more prevalent is renewable diesel, which, as the name suggests, is a drop-in displacement for traditional diesel fuels. If you think about activities, as Alex mentioned, long-haul heavy vehicle mobility, where there aren't other technology options there to meet those targets, that does work. There's also been a prominence of renewable diesel use in the construction sector. So people might be familiar, for example, large cranes that operate in the CBD, and I can see a couple out of the building here. They've started to use renewable diesel as a fuel source to, again, lower their emission intensity of their operations. The challenge with this is that things like renewable diesel in particular aren't available at retail bowsers. So again, that's a challenge of supply and demand starting to evolve. But I would say, Jonathan, and just knowing I've got a little bit of time, is that what I would encourage the participants in the webinar today is to understand this more. This isn't something that you can necessarily purchase tomorrow, but you can understand its role and its use in your longer term operations. So you do have that information at hand. There will be a time in the future, and again, Alex mentioned some of the initiatives that are at play, that this will become a mainstream fuel that is available and probably most relevant for a lot of our participants. So I think at this point in time, the key message or takeaway is information. Gather the information, understand your needs, understand what your requirements are, and within relevant timeframes, that will likely become available to you.
Fantastic. And while I've got you, Matt, a question on terminology. Be happy to hear from the other panelists as well. But from Peter Morris, it's probably a burning question, and he can't listen to the rest of this webinar until we answer it. But can we start to use only a single terminology once and for all to simplify the narrative? So rather than SAF, it's not really a topic of my expertise. Is saying rather than SAF, we should use renewable fuels or something?
Yeah, it's a good one, Jonathan, probably even a level above that. And I think where this will eventually move towards is things like carbon intensity. So again, if you think about the hydrogen narrative, people are fixated with things like green and blue and turquoise and all sorts of colors of hydrogen, where the real question becomes, what's the emission intensity that you're using that for? So I do think, Jonathan, things like certification, etc., are taking place. I know the Commonwealth Government and Brad mentioned some work around certification. So I do expect that will play out as these sectors evolves. But the real, I think, message here is, what the objective here is to reduce your emissions and do it in a economically sustainable way, and therefore understanding what that emissions profile looks like, whether it's through a life cycle or a certification regime, is probably the key takeaway.
Rupert, did I hear your ears prick up on that question around terminology?
I don't know if that microphone's better now. I've changed the source. Yeah, no, it's always a challenge, and it's as Matt mentioned, it's a challenge across hydrogen and renewable fuels. I think Matt's point is right, and I think ultimately carbon intensity. I think there's going to be an increased focus on carbon intensity as we go forward. Under at the last federal budget, we saw that there was a commitment to expand the guarantee of origin regime to renewable fuels, which is going to be really helpful, because ultimately it's not apples with apples. Customers really want to understand what is the life cycle carbon intensity of the fuel that they use, because that is a true enabler of sort of green premiums, and you can start really pricing the carbon then. And we're certainly not there yet in Australia, but the guarantee of origin regime's been rolled out in the hydrogen sector for the last few years through the CER, so the Clean Energy Regulator, and so the plan is to expand that to renewable fuels, so that we've got some funding now to do that. But then we certainly in the aviation sector, more so than the domestic sector, alignment with global accounting mechanisms as well is important. So a bit to play out here, but ultimately customers will want to know, well, what is the carbon intensity of the fuel that they're buying and using, because then that flows back to their emissions, or it will in time when there's some regulatory changes flow back to their Scope 1 emissions, which is really important.
Rings true to me, that question. When BRC-A was set up, we had to try and categorize between all the different types of PPAs. There were wholesale, retail, financial, CFD, virtual, sleeved, and all these things. We had to try and categorize and create some sort of streamlining of that terminology. Simon, it looks like you're back in range now. Did you have any thoughts on the topic? You just went from mute to unmute to mute again, and now frozen. So bad timing again. Sorry, Simon. We had a question on that emissions intensity that Matt raised, and maybe it's a good one for you, Brad. I think you might even be typing an answer, but what's the typical emissions intensity?
I'm here. You can hear me now?
Oh, yeah. Would you like to go, Simon?
You can hear me?
Yep. Can hear you. Is it still in range? There's a bar under his video. What does that mean? Oh, well, he's off now. So, Brad, can you see that question there?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the typical emissions intensity range for biogas versus fossil fuels? So that's a question which is has a complex answer. And one of the reasons for that is we only have one biomethane project in Australia to go by. And it also, with biomethane projects, the emissions intensity associated with the production is going to be different from project to project, depending on the feedstocks that are used, the transport emissions from that feedstock, the technology of the production, etc. And if you capture that CO2 that you're pulling out of it when you clean up the biogas. So that's one thing. There's the production emissions, which is essentially the Scope 3 emissions of the end user. And then there's the Scope 1 emissions, and that is the combustion of the gas, right? In the National Greenhouse Account factors, the NGA factors, that puts the combustion emissions of biomethane at almost zero. It's not zero, but it's almost zero. And that's because of the notion that for any biomethane that is combusted and burned, the emissions go into the atmosphere and it is absorbed back into the biomass, which is regrown and then used for more biomethane production. So that's a circular process of emissions. We're not liberating carbon from underground, which has been there for millions of years, as we do with fossil gas, which is then released into the atmosphere. So that's the difference there. There's also a it depends on what state, what jurisdiction you are living in, or your project is in, because or what the gas user is in, because depending from state to state, the emissions intensity of the fossil gas production is different as well. So it's difficult to actually put a range on it. Hopefully, in a couple of years' time, we'll have enough data from several projects that are popping up around the country to do that analysis and make that assessment. But as I mentioned in my first couple of slides, that Malabar biomethane project on a life cycle emissions basis is 90% lower than fossil gas. So that's a really good indicator to tell us that these biomethane projects are going to make a good dent in the emissions profile that we need to target.
And Dylan had a question, Brad. This also rings true to BRC-A. Is there a way of connecting buyers and sellers of biomethane? Everyone asked that about corporate PPAs for us. I'm sure biomethane buyers know where to find biomethane developers at the moment, or is there work to be done there?
There's work to be done there, and we do our best in trying to connect them up, and that's one of the reasons I'm here today, is to get the word out there. So we're putting on we've got a bit of a promotion campaign where we're trying to put this outreach to customers and trying to connect them up with developers, because it's not like your let's say your oil and gas businesses, explorers, developers, which are, everyone knows, BP, Shell, Chevron, Woodside, all these guys. So it's easy to go to them. But a lot of these renewable gas producers are small players, and they're not known to the public very readily. So we will have a lot of information on our website soon of where the projects are, who the developers are, also the energy retailers or dedicated certificate traders that will be the off-takers of those certificates, who then sell them to the end users as well. So please keep an eye on our Green Power website, but also reach out to me if you'd like to know more about this, and I can connect you up directly with some biomethane producers.
I thought that might be the answer. The answer is to email Brad. And I see Brad and also Alex have been busy answering some of the questions via text format, which is fantastic. It'd be great to hear from Alex and maybe Rupert and Matthew and Simon if he's online. But Alex first on renewable fuels for the maritime sector. Is that covered in your grant funding or something Arena's looking at?
Got it. It's one that we're looking at the moment. I think part of how we've entered the space to date has been in the biggest pool of emissions. So road transport has been that by a fair way. So that's where historically we've played, and we've edged into the aviation space just given the size of that pool, particularly when you include international emissions. So maritime isn't a current focus. That said, the Department of Infrastructure is doing work on the side, as well as the broader net zero piece. So keen to keep evolving that thinking, but not something that we're currently active in.
Does Australia have less influence on maritime because we don't own the shipping companies or even man the ships these days?
There's a few, and so notwithstanding that it's an important sector and plenty of people willing to do the work there, as a pool of emissions, it's smaller than some of the others. And I guess in a world of constrained resources, we've had to pick a few. But as you can see with the recent budget announcement and the effort on working up the net zero sector plan, more to come in that space, I'm sure.
Fantastic.
Just on that, Jonathan, if I may, Ben posed an interesting question in the Q&A. So I'll pick it in two parts. The first was on.
What was the question again? Sorry.
No, so the first part was heavy vehicles aren't hard to abate, and there's depends on which part of the market you're in, and the heavier the vehicle, the more open it is. I think as battery performance increases, some argue that would just keep coming up the weight classes. Others say that the pool of emissions in the heaviest trucks, so your prime movers and your road trains, that just lends itself to a liquid fuel and therefore fuel cell. So I think it is still open for debate, and that's where even if you look at some of the OEMs like Volvo, who have gone hard at removing their ICE vehicles, they still have projections that ICE will be part of their mix that they look to service over the next 20 years. And so it does open the door that if you've got existing infrastructure, the best way to influence the total cost of ownership and cut out a good chunk of emissions is actually to leverage that infrastructure and replace it with a lower carbon liquid fuel. The second piece of Ben's question was on feedstock. How do you attribute it to the highest and best value? It's a great question. It's possibly the greatest reason why the bioenergy roadmap exercise was stood up, to understand how do you liberate different types of feedstock in different parts of the country with different ownership structures. I think what's emerging is there needs to be proximity between the source of the feedstock and then how you process it, and making sure that's efficient so that cost of transportation isn't overly high and doesn't impact the CI or the carbon intensity too badly. And then secondly, there needs to be a demand pull through so that those who are willing to pay can help shape the market. And talking to some of the points that Rupert made, the corporate buyers have a role to play in clubbing together and saying this is a product that if it existed, there'd be a willingness to pay. And that's what's been missing over the last couple of years, because definitely at the Arena side, we've been focused on working with technology developers and suppliers who might look to have the product available with a healthy gap to commercialization. And so the role of the corporates is critical here in showing that there is a willingness to pay, either voluntary or perhaps through measures like Safeguard. And that's how you start to bridge the gap and shape up where the best uses of those feedstocks should be.
Fantastic. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Sorry.
Well, so you can hear me now, Jonathan?
Yes. Hello.
Okay. Well, shall I bring it home since for you?
That's good.
Simon Curry from Energy Estate.
Thanks,
I'll give you the potted version. This is not rocket science. It's not many years ago we did the first corporate PPA, which was the Telstra one, which I was involved in, and I can tell you I'm definitely swapping from Optus to Telstra after the last hour. I'm out here on the Eyre Peninsula with Attilio Pinieri doing renewable fuel projects. This is coming much faster. Just like we thought corporate PPAs were going to go slow. You think back to those first days of BRC. This isn't something, I'm sorry, Matt, that's going to happen in the future. It's happening now. We need corporates to start buying renewable fuels just like they started buying renewable energy, renewable electricity. You need to start to blend it with what you're buying. If you're going out, just buy a little bit of renewable fuels. You've got fuel loads of corporates. Your customers have got fuel loads. We have the bioenergy. We've got the green hydrogen coming. We've got all the dynamics to be a leader for our own energy security. And the project developers are there. They just need the corporates to start not just giving a short-term contract to their normal retailer or a fleet card. They just need exactly the same dynamism that Jonathan was mentioning that we brought to fuel electricity. This is really not rocket science and hard. I've lived in Australia for 10 years. There's been no money spent on bioenergy. That is going to change because you have the resource. You've got the resource. You've got all the people who are working with Rupert and things like Hydrogen Head Start and the rounds to come. We have the momentum to do this, and we will need corporates to play a part. We're not doing this just for fun. We're doing this to save the planet for our children and our grandchildren, and renewable fuels and the carbon intensive fuels really matters, and corporates have to play a role. I was there at the very beginning of corporate PPAs in Europe, and people were like, why are we doing it? And now everyone knows. And this is the same. Europe with resources doing it. We're seeing it in the US with RMI and REBA, and Australia can and will play a part. This is not mouth-wateringly expensive to do. What's mouth-watering expensive is not to have fuel in the future and to leave ourselves with the energy security issue. And think about, as you do this, what you can do with the First Nations groups where you do these projects. Bring the First Nations people with you. I'm sitting here with the First Nations from Gladstone, with Artelio on the Eyre Peninsula. This is our opportunity to bring them in from day one as we do these projects. And let's not look back and go, oh, we didn't think about them to the end. Oh, we can bring the farmers, regional communities who have major fuel loads, 1 million tonnes per annum on the Eyre Peninsula. We can decarbonise that. We can bring fuel security by just working together.
Thank you so much, Simon. Great rallying cry. Technology and the detail is important, but we've also just got to make this happen, don't we? I'll just close it out now. We've only got a couple of minutes to go, but first I'd be remiss not to ask Brad to throw his email into the chat. There has actually been a request in the Q&A for your email. You're more popular than us now, Brad.
I did. Should be.
Hopefully everyone can see it there in the chat. So thanks so much, everyone. Firstly, a big thank you to our panel today. It was a fantastic discussion, a topic I don't have much expertise in, so it was great to come and facilitate in Jackie's absence and learn so much. Also, a big thanks to our members for without you, we would not exist. So thanks very much for supporting BRC-A. If you would like to participate more actively in these webinars as a panelist or at any of our events, please get in touch. We run our industry engagement and webinars and events purely for this purpose. So please get in touch with presentation topics, webinar topics, and how you'd like to contribute. Once again, thanks so much and have a great rest of your Thursday. Cheers.
And I'll just jump in there. Thanks so much, JP, as well, from myself and everyone for jumping in there when I am having a bit of a COVID moment there. Wonderful job you've done today. Thank you. With those questions that we have not answered, we will pop those into an email and circulate those with the panel. And then we'll share answers online as well. So once again, thank you to our fantastic panel today for doing an awesome job. Well done, Simon, for getting the connection to happen eventually too. I know that's not very easily done. But thanks, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at our next one. Cheers then.
Thank you.